I've always had my own garden.
Yeah.
Even when I was at my first school, my prep school, we were given a little strip of garden, perhaps as long as this room.
Yeah.
And in that we could grow flowers, but more particularly vegetables. When she died, what was I to do? There was nothing there except a couple of apple trees. And so I could either develop it myself or I could leave it as wilderness. But I didn't want to do that. And so I designed the garden that we shall now march round. This is where I hold my summer parties. Well, to a large extent I did. I mean, this, for instance, can flower and fruit at the same time. I forget what it's called. This is an Acer newly planted because I have a beautiful Acer in the front garden. And this one appears to be not doing too well. I'm not quite sure about it. Anyhow, there we are. Now these weeds, they flower only in the autumn, and they're a perfect nuisance until they flower, and then they're beautiful. And they're called fox and hens.
Yeah.
On the other hand, these weeds are wild strawberries. What else? Well, it's pretty well everything else I planted, and in particular, you came at the wrong time. This is a colquitzia, and when I planted it, it was a series of twigs so big, and it's, well, you can see that there was blossom. I never prune it, but it blossoms for 2 months during the year. It's very beautiful. Now here I have a tree that is not very successful. It's sort of alive, but it doesn't show the sparkle that it used to do in Macedonia. It was when I first saw these trees. I forget the name of it, but it doesn't like English climate. What does like English climate is the cherry tree.
Yeah.
And these cherry trees, I swear to you, were born as pips. I planted the pips. Well, this was put in by a family who owned the house in the 1930s, when to have a swimming pool at all must have been a miracle. And my wife always said, well, what are you going to do? Are you going to renovate it? I said, well, it's too small, you know, a couple of strokes and you're across it. And so I went to the local pet shop and bought 6 goldfish, tipped them into this great Pacific, and they flourished ever since. And this weed is a Canadian weed that aerates the water. So, but you can see there's at least one fish there. But, oh yes, a little group there. In fact, there are scores of them. Come out here and you stroll around here and you feel extremely calm. And you think, well, the world's a marvelous place, isn't it? If only there weren't all these other people in here. So there's a little place where I can sit and read Hamlet. As I sometimes do. Just occasionally, I see a little fox here. I'm very fond of foxes. Now, this is where a fox has evidently killed and eaten a pigeon. This is a tree I planted. It's a very small tree, and it is a Portuguese laurel. Absolutely beautiful. When it flowers, its fragrance fills the whole garden. It smells lovely. But as it is, well, as you can see, the leaves are beautiful. But next year, it will flower again and smell sweet again. This year, no. In the spring, I shall clear it and plant potatoes. Potatoes are such good-natured things. They grow on their own, and they'll be okay. I wanted a waterfall. So, and the landscape gardener kindly built this in for me. Yeah. And as you see at the top, there is the, he's the Thai master of music. His name is Pa Mani. And there he sits, dominating the waterfall. No, I think on the whole, you know, science fiction writers tend to live in skyscrapers. So I can't think of anyone who's written about a garden. Oh, there must be many. Yeah. Who knows?
Yeah.
Well, I could see there was a good story there, but also I thought there was room for all sorts of amazing metaphors and sentences and adjectives. I mean, very rich soil. And that was what I liked. And I think actually it's one of the reasons why people like hothouse. I don't know about that, but I've always suspected books full of, well, I think it's full of, perhaps it's not, remarkable sentences. Who knows? I was definitely writing short, I suppose, very short stories at the age of 3. And my mother was delighted and would bind them in some old spare wallpaper to make little booklets. And those went on my nursery shelf. So at the age of 5, when on the whole, a chap is on friendly terms still with his teddy bear, I was separated from my bear and sent to a preparatory school. I would tell the boys ghost stories, and I suppose horror stories as well. But certainly I remember the ghost stories. And so when one of the other boys called out, "Shut up, Aldiss, you bastard!" and hide down the bedclothes, this was a confirmation that I had told a good story. And so it went on, and so really I've never stopped, you know. Terribly habit-forming writing. What is its attraction? Is not its attraction the fact that the reader is displaced to wherever, the planet Mars or the Andes or next door. And I think that much of the attraction of science fiction lies not so much in the science as in this disorientation. My situation was this. I do think there was an awakening, as you say, in the 50s. But my situation was different, although not totally different from Jimmy Ballard's. I had spent at least 4 years overseas. I'd been in the British Army. I had been sent out to fight the Japanese. And when I came back to England, I was very much disillusioned. The British people were weary, exhausted from the war. There was a lot of rather bad rebuilding going on, but apart from that, everything seemed dreary. And indeed, they celebrated my return to England by putting bread on ration. I mean, it was a pretty miserable time. In my poverty, I worked in a bookshop, and the Brightfeld Diaries is a comedy of, at least in part, of life in a bookshop. Those early stories, collected as Space-Time and Nathaniel, were published, I don't know, here, there and everywhere. I had to look at them recently. I thought they were really quite good. Some of them, for instance, the one called Outside. The first sentence of the story, entitled Outside, is, "They never went out of the house." Now that is such cunning strategy. You know, how is this story called Outside? And then you start with people who never go out. And so that you're immediately hooked, and then the story begins. I phoned the Daily Telegraph and said, "I've got an idea that I think you would like very much indeed. And that is, you run a competition for what I call a mini saga. That's a story of 50 words. Not more, not less. Exactly 50. So that you have to be not only literate, but numerate. You have to be able to count up to 50. And to my astonishment, the Telegraph loved the idea. And we went on, and I think all told we did it for 6 years. One morning, at about 4 in the morning, I woke with a tremendous dream. And I sat up in bed, and my wife said, "What's the matter?" And I said, "Oh, I've had a most extraordinary dream about what would happen if a lot of people were stranded on Mars. It would prove something that Darwin says, not that there's a competition. Yes, there is competition in everything, but there's also collaboration in many things." And I said, and this whole story could be about collaboration. And she said, "Yes, well, go to sleep, and then in the morning you can write it down." But I said, "Oh no, I daren't. I might have forgotten it in the morning." And I went down and wrote 4 pages on my computer straight away of what became White Mars. And then I thought of dear Roger, enjoying my old home. And so I phoned him and said, "Would you like to put some real science in it?" And he said yes. And so that's how we collaborated on that. Why do we read? Why do we love books? Why do books change our minds? I think they're a most important instrument.